The Inheritance of Silence. Ryan Chandler returned to the town of Havenwood not as a prodigal son, but as a reluctant executor. Judge Elias Thorne, the man who had been a second father to him, was dead, and Ryan, his star pupil, had been tasked with settling his considerable estate. For Ryan, a rising star in a cutthroat Chicago law firm, it felt like a step backward, a forced return to the sleepy, provincial world he had worked so hard to escape. Havenwood revered Judge Thorne. He was a pillar of the community, a man whose wisdom and charity had guided the town's growth for 50 years. His funeral was a grand affair, attended by everyone from the mayor to the local farmers. Standing beside the grave, Ryan felt a profound, uncomplicated grief for the man who had taught him everything he knew about the law. The complications began in the judge's dusty, wood-paneled study. Ryan was sorting through decades of legal documents, a meticulous but mundane task, when he found it. A small, locked metal box tucked away at the back of a filing cabinet. A cabinet he was certain he had already checked. Inside was not the official, registered will, but a different one, a handwritten draft, along with a stack of brittle, yellowed property deeds and correspondence dating back to the 1950s. As Ryan read, a cold, sickening dread began to creep up his spine. The documents laid out a story of quiet, methodical theft. They showed how Judge Thorne, then a young, ambitious lawyer, had used legal loopholes and intimidation tactics to systematically acquire land from the local Native American tribe, whose ancestral lands the town was built upon. He had exploited their lack of legal knowledge, offering insultingly low prices and creating fraudulent claims to push them off the very ground that was rightfully theirs. Havenwood wasn't built on hard work and community spirit. It was built on a foundation of lies and stolen earth. This wasn't just a historical injustice. The draft of the will, written in the judge's shaky, late-life hand, was a confession. It was an attempt to return a significant portion of the now valuable downtown land to the descendants of the tribe he had disenfranchised. A will that had never been signed, a confession that had never been made. Ryan felt like he was suffocating. The man he had idolized, the town he had once called home, all of it was a lie. He was staring at the damning documents when a soft knock came at the study door. It was Kate Holloway, his Kate, his high school sweetheart, the girl whose memory was the one part of Havenwood he had never managed to leave behind. She was the mayor's daughter, now a fiercely intelligent and passionate local historian, and she looked even more beautiful than he remembered. "I heard you were back," she said, her smile warm and genuine. "I came to see if you needed help. My father and I are organizing a memorial for the judge, a statue in the town square. We wanted your input." Her words were like a physical blow. A statue for the man who stole the very ground it would stand upon. It's a lot to go through," he managed, gesturing vaguely at the piles of paper, his hand instinctively covering the box. "He was a great man," she said, her voice soft with a reverence that now made Ryan's stomach turn. "He built this town. He was its heart." They spent the next hour talking, the old, easy chemistry between them returning, as if the 10 years they'd been apart were only a momentary pause. The spark was still there, undeniable and strong. He found himself wanting to confess everything to her, to share the terrible burden of his discovery. But he couldn't. Her father, the mayor, was Judge Thorne's oldest friend and political ally. Her family's entire legacy was intertwined with the judge's. The truth wouldn't just tarnish a statue, it would shatter the foundations of her life, her family, and the entire town. As she was leaving, she paused at the door. It's really good to have you home, Ryan. I've missed you." He watched her go, his heart a battlefield of conflicting emotions. He was falling for her all over again, but their rekindled connection was already built on a secret. He held a truth that could destroy her, and a lie that would destroy him. The law he had dedicated his life to demanded disclosure, but the love he was just beginning to rediscover demanded silence.
In the weeks that followed, Ryan lived a fractured existence. By day, he was the dutiful executor, meeting with the town council, including Kate and her father, Mayor Holloway, to discuss the official estate and the plans for the judge's memorial. He would sit in meetings, nodding along as they lauded the judge's integrity and generosity, the secret documents a burning weight in his briefcase. By night, he was a man obsessed. He drove out to the reservation, a sparse, neglected patch of land 20 miles from Havenwood's prosperity. He spoke to the tribal elders, not as a lawyer, but as a man seeking history. He met a young, fiery tribal lawyer named Sarah Blackwood, who had been fighting the town for years over water rights and land claims, armed with little more than oral histories and a deep, burning sense of injustice. "Your town celebrates Judge Thorne as a saint," she told him, her dark eyes sharp and assessing, as they stood on a bluff overlooking the river that separated the reservation from Havenwood. "My people remember him as the man who politely, legally, and ruthlessly took everything from them." He listened to their stories, and each one was a fresh nail in the coffin of the man he had once admired. He cross-referenced their accounts with the documents in the box. It all lined up. The truth was undeniable. Meanwhile, his relationship with Kate deepened with a speed that both thrilled and terrified him. They fell back into their old rhythm, their shared history, a comfortable, familiar landscape. They went for long walks by the river, had dinner at the town's only decent restaurant, and talked about everything except the one thing that mattered. He saw in her the same passion for justice that he had once had, before the cynicism of corporate law had dulled its edge. She was fighting to preserve a legacy. He was struggling with the urge to destroy it. The lie was a constant, gnawing presence. Every time she would touch his arm, every time she would smile at him, a wave of guilt would wash over him. He was deceiving her. Their entire relationship was predicated on his silence. The breaking point came during a town hall meeting about the new statue. Ryan was in the audience, watching Kate at the podium. She spoke with such passion about the judge, about the community he had built, about the values he had instilled in all of them. The townspeople listened, their faces glowing with pride. It was a beautiful, heartfelt speech, and every word of it was a lie. Ryan felt a sudden, suffocating urge to stand up, to shout the truth, to shatter the perfect, placid surface of their shared delusion. After the meeting, they walked together through the town square, the proposed site for the statue. "You were amazing up there," he said, and he meant it. Her passion was real, even if its foundation was not. "I believe in this town," she said, tucking her arm through his. "And I believe in the people who built it, like the judge and like my father." She looked up at him, her expression serious. "And that's why this is so important to me, preserving that." "But what if the history we're preserving isn't the real history?" he asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. She frowned, pulling her arm away. "What's that supposed to mean?" He backpedaled, his heart pounding. "Nothing. Just a lawyer playing devil's advocate. History is always written by the victors, right? She didn't look convinced. A small, worried line appeared between her brows. You've been different, Ryan, since you came back. Distant. It feels like you're keeping something from me. I'm just stressed, he lied. Settling the estate is more complicated than I thought. He had placated her, but he knew he had planted a seed of doubt. The wall of his silence was beginning to crack. That night, unable to sleep, he returned to the judge's study. He needed to make a decision. The lawyer in him knew his duty. He was legally and ethically bound to present the second will. It was a valid testamentary document, even if unsigned, and it could form the basis of a massive lawsuit. It was the right thing to do. But the man in him, the man who was falling in love with Kate Holloway all over again, was terrified. The truth wouldn't just disinherit a town, it would destroy the woman he loved. It would reveal her father as, at best, a willing accomplice, and at worst, a co-conspirator. It would shatter her entire world. He stood in the silent, moonlit study, the fate of a town and the future of his own heart resting on the contents of a single, secret box. He had come to Havenwood to bury a man he revered, and instead unearthed a monster. Now he had to decide whether to expose the monster and lose everything, or become one himself by burying the truth all over again.
Kate wasn't a fool. Ryan's evasiveness had planted a seed of suspicion that she couldn't ignore. She loved the man he was, but the man he had become since returning to Havenwood was a stranger in a familiar body. He was haunted, and she was determined to find out why. Her historical research on the town's founding, meant to provide context for the judge's memorial, became a personal investigation. She started digging deeper, not into the judge's celebrated public life, but into the town's origins. She spent her days in the county records office, a place of dust and brittle paper, cross-referencing old maps and property deeds. At first, she found nothing but the official, sanitized history she'd always known. But then she found the discrepancies, a series of land transfers in the 1950s that were legally sound but ethically questionable. Deeds signed with an X by tribal members who she knew from her research were literate. Property sales recorded at prices so far below market value they were practically theft. And on every single one of these dubious documents were two familiar signatures: Judge Elias Thorne as the presiding lawyer, and her own father, Mayor Holloway, as the official town witness. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture she didn't want to see. Her father's vague answers when she asked him about the town's early days, Ryan's cryptic question about the real history. It was all connected. Meanwhile, Ryan made a decision. He couldn't live with the lie, but he couldn't bear to destroy Kate. He chose a third path, a lawyer's path, a compromise. He would not release the documents publicly. Instead, he would use them as leverage for a private settlement. He arranged a meeting with Sarah Blackwood, the tribal lawyer. In the sterile, neutral environment of a small-town diner, he laid out the truth. He didn't show her the documents, not yet. He just told her what they contained. She listened, her expression unreadable, her coffee growing cold. When he was finished, she was silent for a long time. "And you've been sitting on this for weeks," she said finally, her voice flat. It wasn't a question. "I was trying to find a way forward," he said, the words feeling weak even to him. "A way forward that doesn't blow up in your face, you mean?" she countered, her eyes sharp. "A way to protect the mayor's daughter?" Her words hit their mark. "It's more complicated than that," he said. "No," she said, leaning forward, her voice a low, fierce whisper. "It isn't. For 50 years, my people have been told they are lazy, that they failed because they didn't work as hard as your people. This town was built on a lie that poisoned my entire community. This isn't about money, Mr. Chandler. It's about the truth. We don't want a settlement. We want a reckoning." Her righteous fury extinguished his hope for an easy solution. She was right. A quiet deal, a secret payment. It would just be another layer of silence, another lie wallpapered over the cracked foundation. He returned to the judge's house defeated. He knew what he had to do. He had to tell Kate. He owed her the truth before he blew up her world. He found her in the judge's study. The moment he saw her face, he knew it was too late. The locked metal box was open on the desk in front of her. She had found it. She had read everything. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with a mixture of tears and a terrible cold clarity. She wasn't hysterical. She was shattered. "All my life," she said, her voice a broken whisper, "I have been the proud guardian of a beautiful story, and it was all a lie." She looked from the documents to him. "And you knew. You knew this whole time, and you said nothing. Every walk, every dinner, every time you held my hand. It was all a lie too, wasn't it?" "No," he said, his heart breaking. "That was the only part that was real." "How can I believe that?" she cried, the dam of her composure finally breaking. "How can I believe anything you say when you were protecting them, protecting him?" She gestured to a portrait of the judge hanging on the wall. "I wasn't protecting him," Ryan said, his voice raw with a pain that mirrored her own. "I was trying to protect you." "I don't need your protection," she shot back, her grief turning to fury. "I needed your honesty. I loved you, Ryan, and you let me build a memorial to a monster while you stood by and watched." The words hung in the air, brutal and irreversible. The truth was out, but it hadn't set anyone free. It had just built a new, higher wall between them. The inheritance of silence had finally been claimed, and it had cost them everything.
The aftermath was a quiet, brutal storm. Kate, armed with the terrible truth and a righteous fury, did not stay silent. She confronted her father. The confrontation, Ryan learned later, was a devastating affair that shattered the carefully constructed facade of the Holloway family. Mayor Holloway, a man used to public adoration, crumbled under the weight of his daughter's accusations, confessing to his complicity, pleading that it had all been for the good of the town. But Kate was no longer interested in the town's founding myths. She was interested in justice. She took the documents, their documents now, and went directly to Sarah Blackwood. The two women, one the descendant of the town's founder, the other the descendant of its victims, formed an unlikely, powerful alliance. The lawsuit they filed was an earthquake that rocked Havenwood to its core. It was no longer a quiet claim over water rights. It was a massive, public accusation of fraud and systemic injustice, with Judge Thorne and Mayor Holloway at its center. The story was picked up by state and then national news. Havenwood, the quaint, peaceful town, was now the epicenter of a story about America's buried sins. Ryan became a pariah. To the townspeople, he was a traitor, the boy they had raised who had returned to burn their home to the ground for the sake of outsiders. Old friends crossed the street to avoid him. Whispers followed him everywhere he went. He was the man who had desecrated the memory of their saint. To Kate and Sarah, he was a well-intentioned coward who had acted too late. They didn't need his help now. Their case, built on the judge's own meticulous records, was ironclad. He was left in a legal and emotional no-man's land, a man without a side. He attended the first preliminary court hearing, sitting at the back of the packed courtroom, a ghost on his own trial. He watched Kate and Sarah, sitting together at the plaintiff's table, a united front. They were brilliant, passionate, and formidable. Kate, no longer just a local historian, had found a new powerful voice. She was no longer preserving a legacy, she was dismantling one. He had never been more proud of her, and he had never felt more distant from her. During a recess, he saw her in the courthouse hallway. He approached her cautiously. "Kate," he said. She turned, her expression unreadable. The warmth that had once been in her eyes was gone, replaced with a cool, weary resolve. "Kate, what you're doing, it's incredible," he said, the words feeling inadequate. "It's the right thing." "Yes, it is," she said simply. "It's just a shame it took me my whole life to see it." She looked at him. "You should know, my father resigned this morning." The news hit him harder than he expected. He thought of Mayor Holloway, a flawed man, but a man who had loved his town. "I'm sorry," he said. "Are you?" she asked, a flicker of the old hurt in her eyes. "Sorry that the truth came out, or sorry for the consequences?" "I'm sorry for the pain this has caused you," he said honestly. She held his gaze for a long moment. "The pain was always there, Ryan. It was just buried, like everything else in this town." She sighed, a sound of profound exhaustion. "I have to go back in." She turned to leave, but then paused. "For what it's worth," she said, not looking at him, "I know you were trying to protect me. It was the wrong way to do it, but I know that's what you were trying to do." It was a small concession, a tiny crack in the wall of her anger. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't an invitation back into her life, but it was something. It was a sliver of understanding. He watched her walk back into the courtroom, a woman who had lost her past but was now fighting for a more honest future. Ryan, in turn, had to figure out his own. He had lost the respect of the town he grew up in and the love of the only woman he had ever truly wanted. He had come to Havenwood to settle a will. He had thought his inheritance was a share of the judge's property and assets, but he had been wrong. His true inheritance was the silence, the lie, and the terrible, painful, and ultimately necessary act of breaking it. And now, like everyone else in Havenwood, they had to learn to live with the consequences.
Months passed. The lawsuit, as expected, was settled out of court. The town of Havenwood, facing irrefutable evidence, agreed to a landmark settlement. It included substantial financial reparations to the tribe and, more importantly, the return of significant ancestral lands, including the downtown plot where the statue of Judge Thorne was once meant to stand. The truth had won. The town itself was fractured. Some residents left, unable to reconcile the new history with their old identities. Others remained, grappling with a collective sense of shame and betrayal. The easy, comfortable silence of Havenwood was gone forever, replaced by the difficult, necessary murmur of conversation. Ryan did not leave. He stayed, weathering the cold shoulders and hostile glares. He sold his condo in Chicago and used the money to open a small, pro bono legal aid office in a dusty storefront on Main Street. He worked for the people the law had forgotten, the farmers facing foreclosure, the small business owners drowned in paperwork, and, most frequently, the members of the tribe, helping them navigate the complex legalities of their settlement. He wasn't seeking forgiveness, he was seeking purpose. He was using his knowledge of the law not to win, but to help, to build something new on the ruins of the old. Kate also stayed. She didn't take over her father's political mantle. Instead, she and Sarah Blackwood co-founded the Havenwood Historical Society, a new organization dedicated to telling the full, unvarnished story of the town. They created a new museum, not in a grand building, but in the old, restored library. Its central exhibit was titled The Inheritance of Silence, and it told the story of the judge, the land, and the lie. Ryan and Kate's paths rarely crossed. They lived in the same small town,
worked towards similar goals of reconciliation, but a chasm of hurt and betrayal remained between them. They were two planets orbiting the same sun of a painful truth, but in separate, lonely orbits. One brisk autumn afternoon, Ryan was working late in his office when he saw her standing outside, looking through the front window. She hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open. She was holding a small framed photograph. She placed it on his desk without a word. It was a very old black and white picture of a group of children, some white, some Native American, playing together by the river. "We found it in the judge's files," she said, her voice quiet, "tucked away. From before he became the man he was." He looked at the photo, at the image of a long-lost, innocent harmony. "A reminder of what was lost," he said. "Or a reminder of what could be," she countered softly. She looked around his small, cluttered office. "What you're doing here, Ryan, it's good work." "I'm just trying to balance the scales," he said with a wry, self-deprecating smile. "Maybe some scales aren't meant to be balanced," she said. "Maybe they're just meant to be broken so we can build something new." She finally met his eyes, and for the first time in months, he saw not the anger of a woman betrayed, but the weary, hopeful warmth of the Kate he had always loved. "We're having a ceremony on Saturday. The Historical Society and the Tribal Council. We're breaking ground on the new community center, on the plot where the statue was going to be." She paused. I thought you might want to be there." It was more than an invitation. It was a bridge, a first fragile step across the chasm. He looked from her face to the photograph on his desk. He thought of the lies, the pain, the reckoning. He thought of the town, wounded but healing. He thought of this brilliant, resilient woman who had lost her heroes but had found her own strength. "I'll be there," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he didn't try to hide. She nodded, a small, beautiful smile touching her lips. "Good." She left his office and he watched her walk down the street, a woman who was no longer just the mayor's daughter, but a founder of the new Havenwood. Ryan turned back to his work, but his heart felt lighter than it had in a year. The silence of the past was a terrible inheritance, but the future, he realized, was not something you inherited. It was something you built, together, brick by painful, honest brick. And for the first time, he felt ready to start building.